Today I'll be discussing urban poverty and crime and the central components contributing to it. I'd like to begin by pointing out two important statistics. The Brookings Institute states the nation's 100 largest poverty-stricken areas in the metropolitan area is almost 70% of the most concentrated communities of poverty, where poverty rates exceed 40%. Second, according to the Crime Victimization Survey, urban areas experience the highest concentration of crime, especially violent crime. Therefore, it can be inferred that the areas with the highest concentration of poverty and urban areas are invariably have the highest inclination towards crime. Taken at face value, these are assumptions that have long remained in the American psyche, as too many inner cities perceived as a racially segregated slum that is full of felons. And indeed, if our very own president-elect refers to some of these urban migrants as smugglers, criminals, and rapists, it must be sentiment echoed by a significant portion of the population. So then the question becomes, what influences these statistics? Are these poor minority urbanites generally inclined to be criminals? Or if they were simply hardworking and educationally driven, why couldn't they escape the crippling poverty and make a better life for themselves? The answer to these questions can be understood through examining the dynamics of poverty and urbanization. Regardless of people's race or social upbringing, what exists in the poorest and crime-ridden parts of our country, that is urban neighborhoods, is a poverty cycle that reinforces the socioeconomic obstacles and prevents even the smartest and most gifted members of those communities from reaching their full potential. In order to understand the basis for the poverty cycle, it must first be understood how these minority populations arrived in the urban centers they are. Between the 1940s and the 1970s, a massive internal migration will sweep the United States as African Americans began moving out of the rural South and into the cities, where the promise for better jobs and a higher quality of life was guaranteed. However, as a greater number of these African Americans moved into the cheaper parts of the cities, the more affluent and long-standing racial tensions from the white population initiated moving out of the cities and into the suburbs. Through time, this geographic segregation intensified, with Hispanic populations moving to the urban areas for the same reasons, however, again being financially constrained to certain areas within the city. Thus, racial segregation of urban communities was initiated. These two graphs will show the intensity of the segregation as it existed today in both Milwaukee and Chicago. Milwaukee on the left demonstrates where the whites live, with the blue dots, Hispanics with the orange, and green representing the African American populations, while in Chicago the same holds, blue representing the white population. That's incorrect. In Chicago, you can see the same, however, the blue dots represent the African American population, and the orange dots, same with Hispanics, and the red dots with the white population. So from here, the question becomes, what's stopping these minority populations from moving out of the urban spaces? The answer to that is inherent in both poverty cycle influences. The first of such factors is called fiscal squeezes. This is defined as increasing limitations on tax revenues coupled with higher demands for urban expenditures, including infrastructure and city services. As urbanization has increased in the past few decades, planners have placed an increased emphasis on continuous city development to attract job growth, tourism, and commercial investment. In order to create this image, city funding is required to develop more tourist attractions, museums, sports franchises, and business centers to remain competitive and iconic relative to other regional and national cities. However, this in turn becomes an issue of urban public investment, as cities only have limited budgets and must decide between allocated resources to city beautification or improving decaying urban infrastructure. However, many of these major neighborhoods have a high concentration of minority populations due to suburban outmigration from the white population. Therefore, there's a disparity between where the investment wants to go for people that use the facilities, mostly the white affluent people from the suburbs, and the other neighborhoods in there that are very minority stricken. So therefore, tax revenues have invariably decreased with the decrease in wealthy residents, when the money coming in to redevelop the aging infrastructure is progressively getting smaller and smaller. Given the choice between redeveloping neighborhoods or beautifying the urban centers, most city planners have opted for the latter, given the high profit potential and outlook it looks on for the city itself. Meanwhile, these impoverished neighborhoods are rejected the resources they need most, and conditions ultimately fail to improve. This in turn leads to overall neighborhood decay, the second instance reflected on by the poverty cycle. Lack of public and private investment allows the infrastructure to appreciate in their neighborhoods, therefore property values decrease. Employers, chiefly in the manufacturing, warehousing, and retailing sectors, will be the first to leave from the suburbs as the higher educated workers and higher land values lead to higher profit potentials versus their inner city counterparts. The urban poor then become unemployed or take on low-skilled jobs, and as a result are forced to move into more overcrowded and cheaper housing areas. The lack of funding to sustain healthcare facilities, schools, roads, and social services invariably leads to a less healthy population and a less educated one, decreasing opportunities for both college and higher paying jobs. As a result, an environment for crime is fostered, and redlining of the community as both criminal or dangerous only hampers future initiatives for building stronger labor markets, education, and housing infrastructure. As such, those that are either forced to attempt the reality of their situation turn to government services or turn to crime to sustain their needs and their livelihoods. The poverty cycle that exists in the urban areas is based on a positive feedback loop, deepening both crime and poverty onto these populations. These issues are generally racially based and have been perpetrated for decades, leading to the high concentrations that we see today. People in these communities aren't destined to be war criminals by birth. Only through social construction and political factors has their hands been forced into a life of crime and extreme poverty. To this token, only through education and understanding of these dynamics can an expected change be put forward in our society to address the issue. However, simply sitting by and disregarding these members of the urban communities as lazy, criminals, or leeching off the government fails to realize the potential that exists only given the chance.